Yes, if you've been following the build-up to the elections, you do know that a heavy dose of peace is required for the forthcoming elections. And so we've got Most Reverend Matthew Kukah joining us now. He is the convener, National Peace Committee. Good morning, and thank you for joining us on the program here today. Yes, indeed. Does this elude us, this peace? Because time and again, build up to elections, and we're here talking again about the need for peace and the work that you do along with your team. Very good work. We hope you continue with that moving forward. But this is going to happen again, and we have to ask at this point in time, what will be different? What do you think will be different this time?
Well, thank you very much. I'm in Yenagua, pretty peaceful, as I've been here for a few days. And there's quite a lot of enthusiasm. The PDP had its grand campaign yesterday. I think the APC will do the same today and so on. So, but to answer your question, look, there can never be too much peace. Life is dynamic. Society is dynamic. And every year and every time we have to renew our commitment. So, peaceful elections are desirable, but as you know, anywhere and everywhere in the world, things can and things do get tense depending on the circumstances. So we are here. Our primary objective is to continue to encourage our people, encourage the electorate, and encourage the political class. And as long as we are alive, we will continue to need encouragement, because without peace, nothing else is important in life. So it's not a stationary object that we say we have arrived at that point, because we'll never arrive at that point.
But do you think these politicians who signed this accord actually live by it? Do they live up to it?
I've used this metaphor before. Two people want to get married, they come, they renew, they commit themselves to loving one another, if you're a Catholic, for the rest of your life, until death do you part. But life doesn't always progress like that. The initiatives we undertake, the efforts we make are not directed just at the political class. Look, the political class will continue to behave the way they behave, largely because we let them behave so. We have said it severally. Merely conducting elections, even the freest and the fairest elections, will never mean that we cannot continue to engage the political class. So what is in serious short supply, and why we continue to seemingly suffocate in Nigeria, is because we assume that after we have elected people, they will be trusted to do good things for us. So this is why we have the media, and a lot of you are doing tremendous work. This is why we have civil society, and a lot of them are doing wonderful work. This is why we are citizens of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. So we don't elect people to behave on our to enjoy on our behalf. We don't elect people to be comfortable on our behalf. Our duty and our responsibility is to constantly make those who govern us feel uncomfortable if they are not performing well. So we are the ones who should lay the ground rules. So free and fair elections are desirable, but they are not a condition and a guarantee for peace and justice and equity. So we have to continue to deal with these issues. This is really what drives democracy.
Well, Your Grace, I'm sure you must be observing what is going on currently in Kogi, Imo, and Bayelsa states. You've heard some of the rhetoric. Well, by the way, I cannot see where he is. I mean, it doesn't say his location right now, but I do know.
He says it's in Yenagua, actually.
In Yenagua. Oh, it does appear I don't want to say you've gone to the most peaceful of the lot. I don't know if that is deliberate. This is me just joking. But seriously, just yesterday we heard and we saw a statement from the police decrying the violence that has happened in Kogi. We just finished a conversation right now with the NLC, and you've also heard their own stance. I mean, they don't think heavens will fall if elections do not hold in Imo State, for instance. Are you concerned when you still hear this sort of rhetoric? Don't forget that Kogi, has had a history of political violence elections in Imo, people have their concerns with how those polls are going to hold, given the security situation there and the political environment, the political temperature. Bayelsa is about the only place where we have heard, well, maybe just one or two examples of people trying to heat up the polity, but the governor saying very strongly that peace is the watchword that they are promoting in the state. So when you look at these other states, don't you have very deep concerns?
Well, I feel very sad because Kogi has been in the front burner, and Yaya Bello, the governor, prided himself with being the youngest governor and being a representation of what the youth of this country can do if they are given the opportunity. Sadly, I think it's been a very poor advertisement for what young people can do. We keep making the point. We are not, the people who are contesting elections are our sons and our daughters. And whatever we do in conscience, we must always think about the good, what we call the common good. I heard the gentleman from Labour speaking about the situation in Imo. And I hope and pray, civil society organizations, unions, churches, women with a bit of moral authority must always act in the common interest of everybody. Without a country, there will be no trade union, there will be no churches. All we need to do is just look outside the window and see what is happening, in the Middle East today, specifically in Israel, what is happening in Gaza. When elections go wrong, it is ordinary people who suffer. So I hope that the Labour leaders who are giving directives for elections in Imo will really be more circumspect and ask themselves who stands to gain and who stands to lose what. At the end of the day, it is the people of Imo. They're not electing somebody who is outside or people who are outside their state. So we must. I just hope, I prayerfully hope that Imo is a deeply Christian, environment, and I hope that the religious leaders and others with moral authority can prevail, on the unions to defer their whatever may be their grievances. This can only be resolved in a very peaceful environment. So I do hope and pray that in the name of the chairman of the Peace Committee, we appeal to them to please do what is needful and ensure that elections are duly conducted. We don't need to continue to put our people through. Our people have suffered enough. So I hope that the police will do their best. We can't, it's very difficult, to make this point, because sometimes we in Nigeria behave as if we are just a bunch of spoiled people. If we look outside the window and see what is happening elsewhere, and see the earthquakes, all the tragedies and human and natural disasters that have afflicted the world, and we have to ask ourselves, what have we done to God that He has been so magnanimous and gracious to us? Why do we turn the sword on ourselves? For me, these are very difficult issues, and I think that the people who are involved in labor, I'm sorry about the way things have gone, but I think they should think about the higher interest of the ordinary people of Imo State and Kogi states, and make sure that these elections, go on. We cannot sacrifice the welfare and well-being of our people on the altar of just, personal grandstanding and people who have just personal or group interests. They can only be useful against the background of the national interests.
Well, I don't know that at the heart of this, I think that's the question that Chamberlain was posing earlier, is sincerity of purpose. When you speak with our political class, it's the same thing over and over again. They say one thing, they do another thing. Bayelsa State has given us a very good example of a leader who actually lived by his words. Former President Goodluck Jonathan hailed from hails, still hails, I don't know my use of English, from Bayelsa State. And today he heads the West African Elders Forum, a forum that goes around Africa, ensuring that there is peace in different elections that hold within the continent. How much of an influence, given just his moral authority, how much of an influence would you say is holding sway in Bayelsa where you currently are?
Well, 2 days ago, I decided to ask somebody to drive me to Otuoke, President Jonathan's hometown. I drove around the village, the town. I saw his house, but obviously he wasn't around. I'm not sure, I don't know his calendar, but I think, I've said it severally. Nigeria is one of the luckiest countries, in the world. We have former heads of states who are still alive. They are active. A good number of them are in various stages of health challenges. But notwithstanding that, we've got enough moral authority to deploy. How that moral authority is deployed depends on the circumstances on the ground. I would have, and I would have thought, actually, I expected, but I really don't know whether President Jonathan is here at home or not. Because, as you know, he already made the point, I think it was in 2019, that he was above party affiliation. But notwithstanding that, I think it also speaks to the sagacity of the local elite to decide which kind of moral authority can they appropriate and deploy. But definitely, given the amount of moral authority that President Jonathan has, it would be unfortunate if Elsa doesn't take advantage of that. But as I said, I've moved around the place. I've been here for a few days, and I've had a chance to look around. I don't see any sign of tension or any anxiety. Things are probably not even like the way they were in 2019. I was here in 2019, and I was the only member of the Peace Committee that showed up here, because it wasn't a very clement environment, at least from the point of view of perception. So I get the point you are making, but as I said, I can only say what I've said, because I really don't know the details. I don't know where President Jonathan is. I don't know whether he's in town, and the level of quality of communication between him and the political elite here. But again, as I said, all of them are largely his children, and as they say, charity begins at home. But given how serene, I don't know whether it's just what I'm looking, where I'm looking, but given how relatively serene the environment is, we can only hope and pray that what we see is what we get.
I asked that question because I had seen a picture. Well, you say you don't know if he's around. Maybe he just paid a flying visit to the state. But yesterday, there were campaigns. The PDP governors were in Bayelsa to campaign for one of their own. And I think they also paid a courtesy visit to the former president. So I was wondering whether the rhetoric that the governor of the state was given, because listening to him on the campaign ground, he kept on emphasizing the role of peace in the election. So I do not know whether that had any influence. There's a picture of them with the former president on the front page of one of the dailies this morning, Daily Independent to be precise. So I don't know whether that has had any influence whatsoever on the rhetoric that we've seen so far, and whether we should actually have more of these elders, prevail on situations. For instance, now you are in Bayelsa. You can only be in so many places at the same time. Maybe we should see a situation whereby in places that are becoming hotbeds, we should see, elders going there to prevail on the political class, to do better by their people in terms of the violence that we're beginning to witness. Would you agree?
Well, you know what they say, married people have a choice between in-laws and outlaws. And if you have your in-laws constantly visiting, then I'm sure that you probably don't feel too comfortable. Look, our hope and our prayer is that even the work of the Peace Committee can and should at some point become redundant based on the fact that ordinary people in Nigeria have gradually begun to develop a culture, because politics is also about culture. It has its own reflexes, that we get to a point in which we don't need to be shepherded, to have certain outcomes. People like President Jonathan with enough moral authority, they face a dilemma. My grandmother used to say, because I'm a twin, my grandmother used to say the mother of twins cannot sleep on one side. So whether the PDP wishes to appropriate President Jonathan, every political party in Bayelsa, and even nationally and internationally, will feel the urge to pull him one way or the other. But again, as I said, we're not going to solve this problem by simply saying we're going to throw a lot of people all over the place. First of all, the Peace Committee is in Imo. The Peace Committee General Way is leading the team. Cardinal Naekan must have arrived Kogi by now. He's a son of Kogi. The presence of these people should be a source of encouragement and inspiration to our people. But look, over and above this, we cannot spend the time in the classroom. We must graduate to a new class of consciousness. And Nigerians must take full responsibility for how these processes are conducted. I mean, there is a point to be made for the size of the country, the limited resources, but INEC can no longer complain about lack of resources because we hear about the hundreds of billions and that are being spent on INEC. But people must also get to a point in which INEC will not have anxieties every time we're about to conduct election. But I think we must also admit the fact that look, we are relatively new in this game. America is over 200 years. And, when I say this, Nigerians like to say, but are we going to wait for all this period of time? It is that really and truly, politics is not, I'm just finished reading, a very beautiful article, that somebody says, look, politics is actually meant for the gods, not for human beings, because the kind of perfection or imperfection that politics is expected to really solve, human beings cannot solve them. And if you look at the statistics, report after report, poll after poll, the United Nations commissioned a poll, I think in 2016, and it showed very clearly that some of the most trusted people in the world are hairdressers, not even politicians. And politicians were way at the bottom of the list. Primarily doctors, hairdressers, even church leaders came behind them. So it's about trust, but we need to learn first to trust ourselves and to deploy trust to institutions and to those who run those institutions. But they must also function in a way and manner that commands respect. That's why we cannot make these things something that happens once in a while. Because really, the critical thing is what happens after election, between the elections. That's where the engagement needs to take place. But Nigerians, as I said, tend to just outsource their responsibilities, and we continue to pray that men and women of goodwill will take over our country and govern us, and will live happily after. It doesn't work like that. We must constantly be pounding the streets. We must constantly be knocking on their doors. We must constantly be reminding our people that the fact that they've been elected puts an obligation on them. Tragically, very often the media becomes the fall dog, so to say, in the sense that when people express opinions that challenge the existing structure, they are considered to be enemies. No citizen that is a democracy can have friends, enemies, or foes. We are all citizens of a country, and any of us can be anywhere at any time. So those who hold trust, hold it temporarily, but they must also understand that they have to be called to account.
Well, the issue of trust raises, or rather emphasizes this question on my mind. The front page of one of the dailies yesterday talked about voter turnout in the last elections. In Bayelsa, where you are, for instance, the voter turnout was said to have gone down by 20 points, from 36.4% to 16.4%. In Kogi, it dropped by 9 points, from 33.6% to 24.6%. Of the registered voters in Imo, only 20% of them voted in February, re-emphasizing that age-long challenge of poor voter turnout over the years for every successive election. So a good number of reasons have been adduced for that. Lack of trust, as you have mentioned, insecurity, and all those things. Is there any way you think that maybe by some imaging or by some essence, people's confidence can grow enough for them to come out and participate in the elections coming out? Generally, from what we understand on the front page of the paper, less than 30% of registered voters came out to vote in the last election. And with all of these rhetorics we're hearing of insecurity, of uncertainties and all, in these other two states beside Bayelsa where you are, even Bayelsa where you are, voter turnout dropped. So how can we shore up those figures? A situation where people they're increasingly losing confidence and trust in the process.
Well, look, I mean, there are many restaurants in every city and any city, but you only go to a restaurant when you are hungry, or you go to a restaurant where you can afford it, or you go to a restaurant when the food is good. Now, voter behavior is contingent on how people and politicians, how people behave. But it's almost like I say, poll after poll, politicians, not only in Nigeria, but literally everywhere in the world, tend to come last when we're talking about people with integrity. That's the irony. Studies after studies have actually revealed that the power that politicians are imagined to have, probably it is misplaced, because in reality, things are not like that. Study after study, politicians are saying they don't feel as powerful as they've often been presented. So I think the point to make here is it is the business of politicians to make politics honorable. It is the business of politicians to make politics lovable, and it is important that they earn the trust of citizens. But we are in Nigeria and most parts of Africa where, as far as politics is concerned, they are in a mode, to quote a famous American scholar, Noam Chomsky, who said, look, he talks about what he calls manufactured consent. That is that the Nigerian politician believes that whether we like him or we don't like him, he's going to win elections because he has the capacity and the strategies for compromising the system. But truth be told, we must also not become so despondent, because there are measurable improvements that are taking place constantly and continually. INEC took the hit. It's having a legitimacy crisis. It's having a confidence and a trust crisis. But having said that, we must also understand that at least the sins of yesterday have to be cured so that tomorrow can be better. I'm convinced that given what we now know and given the way things turned out, we now have to ensure that the media, the civil society groups, all of us, whether we're in academia or whatever, I would wish that us will focus on more things than just the issue of the conditions of their services, but I will focus more on the national issues of how to fix the institutions in this country. Because if we can engage the National Assembly, and I hope that they can be sufficiently patriotic to understand that we need to address the issues that we recommended in the OS panel about how to go through these processes, and the whole question of how to shift the balance of the balance of proof and so on, and to ensure that nobody sits on the throne for us to have this contestation, but that processes can be concluded before anybody is legitimately sworn in as president, governor, member of the National Assembly. And we must then begin to work towards ensuring that we take the judiciary deliberately outside the political processes. For me, these are the issues that are generating the tension. When the politicians now realize that there is no constriction of the goalpost simply because of power and influence, people will be forced to behave. But right now, because people perceive the institutions are weak and they are within their control, that's why our politicians are behaving so horribly badly and daring anybody to challenge them. Because we must ensure that in the next election, the judiciary and other institutions that have nothing to do with elections are kept in abeyance, and that the INEC will be able to conclude these processes in a way and manner that Nigeria can feel happy. And once we get on that route, and it will continue, it's a route of renewal.
All right, Most Reverend Matthew Kukah, convener, National Peace Committee. Always a pleasure to have you on, and all the best for your work, sir.
Thank you very much, Chamberlain.
All right. We will be back in a moment and we'll talk about election security. Stay on with us.